In last video, we actually solved the hypothetical technical requirement using callbacks. Okay, if you did not watch that video, I encourage you to watch that video to understand promises better in this video. So this is the piece of code that we've written already. So what I can do is here we are actually using callbacks. CB is callback that I'm sending it from this AWS Cognito authentication function. So what I can do is here, in order to convert it, what we can do is we can simply put return promise, okay, the very first line, and here I'm gonna write resolve and reject and paste all this piece of code, okay, the callback related code inside here. And here, instead of callback, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give resolve and I'm going to give results of 0. Here, whenever error comes, I'll just reject it with the error and I'm supposed to handle it accordingly. So we successfully converted callback into promises. This function, what it does is previously it returned callback. Now it is returning a promise, okay? And we can also remove this. We don't need this anymore, just we'll pass the username. Similarly, we'll also do the same to the next function as well. Here, copy the entire piece of code, keep it here. Instead of callback, I am gonna resolve and results of 0. Here I'm gonna reject with error. That's it. So we actually modified the code. Instead of using callbacks, we now are using promises. These functions previously are returning callbacks. Here we can remove this as well. Now they are returning promises. So I need to handle that accordingly here. This is user active. What I'm going to do is here, instead of error result, I can use dot then. Dot then means if the promise is resolved, here I'll be having the result. Okay, in result, I can actually call this entire piece of code, right? And then if there are any errors, I'm gonna catch it, error, and I'm gonna simply print that error. Console.log and error is or error in. I'm gonna give this. Here I'm gonna give, and I'm gonna print the error. So this is all not needed. Remove it. This is also not needed. So we actually modified the callback into what do you call the promises. See here it is returning a promise, so I am using dot then, and finally once I get the result, whenever it is resolved properly, it will go here and this piece of code will be executed, and if it is rejected, it will come here and it will be printed or the control will execute the steps that are there in the catch block. And again, what we can do is here again we have this callback, right? This is also we converted into what? We converted into promises. So that also I'll simply make it as dot then, and I'm gonna give result and paste the entire code here. And if there are any errors, I'm gonna catch it. Console.log error, and I'm gonna remove this. It's fine. We should not get confused. This is promise, and this is again we use promises. So what we can do is we can remove this if error also, else block is also not needed. We can directly write this result. That's it. So there is no callback hell anymore, but somehow it looks like promise hell. Okay, in this promise again I have to actually do this. This is another promise. Okay, What I can do is we'll first try to write like this, and then we can refactor the code and make it more promisable. Okay, so my code looks good. Let's try to execute and check the output. Okay, now my terminal is opened. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna navigate to my folder. Okay, I created another folder and copied the entire code callbacks into promises, the same piece of code, and then I'll go there, execute. Yes, it's executing perfectly fine. The output that we have seen for callbacks and promises is same, but somehow I feel like this is a promise within a promise. And if I wanted to convert this also into a promise, let's try to do that, then I think it's a promise hell. Okay, and that is when we'll get a savior called async await. Okay, prior to that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this also into a promise. So function, I'll call it as authenticate user, or get authenticate user. We'll call it as authenticate user, and the very first statement should be promise, and it should have two parameters or arguments. It should have resolve, and then we'll be having a reject, and I'm gonna copy paste this entire code there. Okay, so here once we get the data here, what I'm gonna do is here I'm gonna resolve data. If there is some error, I'm gonna reject with this error, and we are supposed to write this entire thing in a separate function. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call it as function main, and then first I have to, this is the logic, right? Validate the user. First I have to authenticate. So first I will authenticate user, and then once I get the data, then what I'm supposed to do, I'm supposed to check is user active, yes, and dot. Then what I'm supposed to do is I'm supposed to check or fetch the user balance. Okay, first let's say we've got the response as data, and of course we won't be using it anywhere because parameters we are passing it from above, and then again dot. Then once we get the data from there, I would like to call fetch user balance, is user active or not. We'll get the result. From that result we are going to actually fetch or extract user ID and pass the same into that function, and again I'm going to use dot then, and finally I want the final result. Okay, I'll keep this. Okay, final result, and you can keep like this. Okay, and then catch directly. I'll copy and paste it here. Okay, that's it. Now it looks clean. We came out of that promise hell. Okay, first we are authenticating the user, and then we are actually fetching checking whether the user is active or not, and then once we get the result from that, we are passing that user ID into fetch user balance, and once we get the data, and this is the final data that we are printing, the result, and let's try to execute and check the same. So I'm going to navigate to my folder, that is promises and node index.js. Oh, nothing is coming. Okay, we did not give the main function, we did not call the main function. Okay, that's the problem. We call the main function. Perfect. See, we see the same result. We did not see any difference. In order to check whether we are getting the right output or not, I just added this NerdyNani. Yes, we are getting the same output. So we are getting the same output as what we've seen in callbacks, and when we actually use dot, then here in this authenticate user, and finally we use the main function. So this is how we actually convert callbacks to promises. Okay, promises is way better than callbacks, because if you write multiple callbacks, or if you end up in callback hell, obviously if a new developer comes and tries to understand the code, it's going to be very tough for him. Okay, so this is far better than callbacks, but still I think that if you have, like as I said, I still remember working for a startup like wherein we have to hit the database 6 times. Okay, like I'll be having 6 denable statements. Okay, and again I feel like this is somehow like promise hell. So in order to avoid that, we have async await. So let's exit from the terminal and let's check this out. Yes, perfect. Whatever the technical requirement was there, we implemented the same using callbacks in the first video, now implemented the same using promises in the second video, and the coming third video we're going to solve the same problem using async await. Before diving in and learning about async await, one more thing that we are supposed to learn is util.promisify. Okay, what I did was basically I copy pasted the code whatever we've written in promises folder into util promisify, and we'll quickly what we're going to do is we're going to quickly turn it back into callbacks. Okay, so that we'll see the power of util.promisify. I'll put it as cb true error. Here I'm going to give it as cb false, and the result I'm going to give the data, and we are supposed to remove this return, and this too we are supposed to remove, and remove. What we are doing, we are simply reverting back all our changes and making it to call back the very first one what we actually did. Okay, and removing all of this, it's not needed, and here I'm going to give it as true, and the error will be as error. Okay, so we're done converting into callbacks. Everything is now callback. So what we can do is I'll comment this out, and we need to write the callback logic. So we already have the callback logic, right? But the problem is, did we write the main function here? No, we did not write the main function here. So let's write the main function. All I have to do is first authenticate user, and then there should be a callback. I'll put it as error, and we're going to put it as data, and if error, we have to do or handle accordingly. Else all I have to do is user active app to call, and here the very first parameter is this. Okay, and then we are going to have a function followed by error result, and if error, okay, we have to deal it accordingly. Else all I have to do is call this. Okay, and the second parameter would be callback function. So error comma, again I'm going to give result, and finally the result would be this. If error, again I need to handle it. Okay, because we already looked at it how we can write the callbacks, right? So that I quickly wrote it, and let's try to run and check it. So now I have a new folder, node index.js. Any errors? CB is not defined. Where is CB? CB is there. Okay, here is where we missed the CB. CB here is also, it's callback basically. CB, that is what it is telling. I don't know what is CB. And perfect. The final result, we are getting the same result. Instead of NerdyNani, what I'm going to do is I'll remove it so that we can check whether the output is coming correct or not. Yes, perfecto. So now let's see the power of util.promisify. What I can do is I can actually import a library, and I'll name it as const util, and require this is already there in the core Node.js library. So what I'll do is let's see the power of util.promisify. what I wanted to promisify is all my callback functions, right? I wanted them to promisify. So here we actually wrote our first line should be written promise, and then we refactored the code in such a way, and we wrote resolve and reject, all those things, right? But now we don't have to do that because this util.promisify will do all that magic for us. Okay, I want is user active and fetch user const. I'm gonna give this, so I'm gonna exit it, and then I'm gonna give it as promise. Same thing is user active, I'll give it as const, and then fetch user balance also. Finally I'm gonna put it as promise and promise. That's it. Okay, we are done using util.promisify. So basically, previously we wrote promises at the very written promise statement from each and every function to convert it from callbacks to promise. So in util.promisify, what actually happens is that heavy lifting is done by this util.promisify itself. So all I have to do is I'll comment this piece of code and use the previous code that we used when we actually used the promises. So I'll uncomment this, so it should work without any issues at all. Let's go run it. Okay, we have it in cd util node index, some error. Okay, the issue is basically here. Okay, we did not comment this properly, so run it. Cannot read properties of dot then. Okay, this issue is basically we are supposed to use this. Okay, promisified thing we are supposed to use. Fetch balance, user promise also we are supposed to use this. Now it should work. Yes, perfect. It's working as expected. What I'll do is I'll put NerdyNani now so that we'll be sure that the output is from here itself. Okay, perfectly fine. So if you have huge callbacks and you wanted to convert them into promise, instead of writing or promise statements or resolve and reject in each and every function, what you can do is you can use this util.promisify. But as I said, okay, callback hell, we actually were delivered to this promises paradise. I call it as paradise till we are yet to reach to heaven, that is async await. We are going to discuss much about in that in the third video we're going to talk about async await more.